Good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. My name is Donald, and once again, I'm hosting for the first time, joined by Keturah, who's at a rest stop in Missouri on her way back to Montana, and it is a rainy, verdant day in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in a room that was previously full of books, but we have a big project afoot in my house right now. So the books are all being moved downstairs. So it's pretty much a blank wall. I've been up since 4 a.m. today. So my usual slow monotone is even slower and more monotonal this morning. And we're joined this morning by Alana Nickels, who is, among many other things, the creator of the Hobo Nickels zine, which we're going to talk about. So Alana, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll get going.
My name is Alana, and I'm also from the Pacific Northwest, but right now I am in Pennsylvania, kind of in the middle of nowhere, because my husband is attending St. Tikhon's Orthodox seminary, because he's a deacon right now, and God willing will be a priest in about a year.
Cool. So this is, we were chatting before we started recording, and I said this is going to be the unofficial Orthodoxy episode of the podcast. Keturah is going to spend the next 2 hours explaining Orthodox theology to Alana and me. And then
I'm pretty simple. You can try. It's okay.
We'll wrap it up. Okay. So can you, to the extent that you want, you can leave as many gaps as you want, but could you tell us your story? So how did you come to Orthodoxy? Could you give us a little bit of a trajectory to how you found yourself in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, hopefully, God willing, going to be a presbyter at a Orthodox parish somewhere pretty soon. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about what that transition is going to look like. But could you lay it on us? How did you end up here?
Well, when people always ask, how did you meet your husband? And we always say we met in church, because it's kind of true. And it's just kind of simple. And then it's like, oh, how nice. But it's not really true, because we really met when I was making another zine, and I was in my very early 20s, and I lived under I-5 in Seattle in the University District. And you probably know the Hurricane Cafe. If you've ever been to Seattle, it's gone now. But it was this sort of all night, you could smoke, 24-hour place. And I knew the staff. And so I had a little booth set up as an office and would camp out there and had all my papers laid out. And people would just come sit at my table, because I was kind of like a fixture there for a year or two. And one day this guy sat down and talked to me for a while. And then years later, we kind of had overlapping friend circles. Years later, we started hanging out, and I ended up marrying him. And so that's the guy, which is we started hanging out again because we both had the kind of friends who hung out at all-night diners and were the kind of people who lived under bridges. But then we started going to church, and their friends were like, don't let it change you. And we were like, please let it change me. And we didn't have anyone else to talk to about it. And so we just started talking to each other with no intention of dating. I wanted to be a nun, and he wanted to, be a celibate priest. And so for a year, we just hung out and didn't even, we weren't even thinking of anything, dating or anything. And I just started thinking that wherever I got sent, I really hoped I could keep in contact with this guy. And if only there was some kind of way in the church that you could be with another person for the rest of your life. If only we had some structure for that. Yeah. So then we got married a year after that. And then, he still wanted to be involved in the church. And when we moved across the country to New York to go to college, and found a church, and did not know whose we didn't know the Archbishop went there. We didn't know the Archbishop grew up in that town. We didn't know anything. We just thought like this is a healthy community and we can get there by car. And that's how we ended up like meeting the Archbishop, who's the most like down to earth, humble, hardworking guy, which isn't true for all bishops. And then the priest there was like, hey, have you thought about going to seminary? And Mark was like, yes. So now we're here. Thank God.
So
that's the very short version.
Can you talk about that moment when you're hanging out at all night diners and then wanting to go to church? Can you talk about that? Like what was the thing that pushed you there?
I think that people hear that I was homeless and they think I must have been on drugs or an alcoholic, and then I went to treatment and found Jesus, which is great, but it's not true. I wasn't doing anything like that. I don't actually think I've changed that much. Like I've always kind of been an extremist and conformist to whatever outside community I'm in, if that makes sense. And I just was not fulfilled by anything. I was like involved with these radical politics and stuff, which I'm totally not. I mean, that's one thing that's definitely changed. I'm not interested in now. And it just seemed like we were trying to like do the heaven on earth anarcho-communist thing or whatever. It didn't. I don't know. I don't want to say I grew out of it because there's people that are really passionate about it. They're older, but like it just like kind of burned out on it. And then I don't know, like you live in Seattle and everything's ironic and kind of cold and distant. And I feel like I actually started going to church just as like a joke. And then I kind of got like tricked into being like, oh, there's actually something to all this. Like reading stories about saints and being like, these women are really interesting. It's too bad they talk about that Jesus guy so much. And then and then thinking like, no, that's actually like the most important part of it. And I mean, it sounds corny, but just like surrendering and not being like so full of myself and thinking I have everything figured out. Yeah. So, I mean, again, that's like in a nutshell, but I think it was just kind of getting tired of my own nonsense and thinking I had everything figured out.
And was it an Orthodox church? And Keturah, I'll turn it over to you in a second, but it's an Orthodox church to start off, or did you kind of go through a variety of churches? Or
I did.
How it went.
I really didn't understand anything, and I didn't go online. I didn't even know the word liturgy. I didn't know that I didn't know that like everyone follows the cycle and reads the same thing every day. I didn't know anything at all. I thought that was so cool when I found that out. So it was like an Episcopalian church, which like I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that was associated with. All I knew is like they do the thing there that looks like a ritual and there's candles. Like it was that stupid, you know, because my family is not religious at all. And they just thought I was like having some kind of crisis or something. So I went there, but then I was like, oh, people here, they don't all like believe the same thing. They don't all believe like the Eucharist is a thing. And so then I started going to a Catholic church and I thought this is closer to the thing. And that was for a few months. But then I noticed everything that we were doing at the Catholic church. I would check and see like, well, what are the Orthodox doing? Because they know what they're doing. And if we're doing the same thing as them, then we're good. And then I thought, well, that's a waste of time. And then I started going to an Orthodox church and I was like, oh, okay, this is like, just felt like this, like I should have done this from the start, but I just didn't have like I should say I didn't have any guidance, but actually a priest at the Episcopalian church totally had it nailed, gave me 2 books on Orthodoxy, and I just never read them. So I should have listened to him from the very beginning. But yeah, I wish I had a moment for you. But it was kind of like I feel like God played a trick on me. And the next thing I knew, I was like, oh no, I think this is real. And I really believe in everything. Now I have to do something about it. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, I find your story so beautiful and so relatable. I'm very much of a traveling myself, and very anti-establishment, very attracted to like anarchy, communism, and also attracted to like visiting churches. I visited quite a few over the course of a couple of summers and wrote this like church hopping series. Probably covered like 30 to 50 different churches. But like my very favorite church at this point is like Catholic or Orthodox churches. I really love Orthodox churches a lot. They're just so beautiful. I could just stay there just for the incense and for like the way that they chant and read the scripture. I just find it so calming and soothing. I just want to sit there and knit all morning and all day, all week. I could just like be there and just like soak it in. It's just so beautiful.
They're amazing.
Yeah. I do have a question. I have quite a few friends that are Orthodox, like newly converted as couples. Do you have like a piece of advice for young couples who are like new into the church, just like ways that they can find support and encouragement as new converts?
Like stay off all the internet stuff. The internet religious stuff is weird. And I mean, I think it's the same advice I'd give to individuals, which is like, actually be kind. Don't think you have to give everyone the impression that you're nice, though, because those are different things. If people don't like you or understand you, you know, like I said, like I'm sure people think like I was like a drug addict, some, like, you know, whatever. People think all kinds of stuff. I have like visible tattoos, and I'm sure like people from different backgrounds think all kinds of things. Don't worry about that. You're never going to resolve it. There's all kinds of people in the church. Just be kind. And if people don't like it, they can lump it. Like being a Christian isn't about everyone thinking you're nice all the time. Just be yourself. It's the Mr. Rogers advice, you know. Yeah, and stay off the internet. By which I mean, you know, the internet orthodoxy. It's kind of weird sometimes. Yeah. And pray together. Have like a prayer rule together. Like my husband prays in a totally different way than me, and I like it took us a while to like do it together, but we found things we could do together and still do things apart. I think that's like a huge thing for couples. Definitely like have a prayer rule, even if it's just like, I don't know, I read a psalm while he prays or whatever, you know, every day, just 5 minutes at least, I think is like, yeah, that'd be number one.
The internet orthodoxy thing, it's fascinating. I've met guys who've come to the church via YouTube channels.
Yeah.
That I'm outside of that. I've tried to watch them and I was like, well, I'm not the audience for this because it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't make sense to me, but it's kind of amazing in a way.
Right.
These guys watch YouTube videos and then next thing you know, they're like coming to Divine Liturgy every Sunday.
I went to church kind of as this will be a gas. So whatever gets you in the door, I don't really care. And I love those super zealous, you know, like I was a super zealous 19-year-old. I was just into like punk rock. So like, I think it's great that they're excited. It's the corners where it's like super hostile. You know, I stayed off Twitter for 2 years once because people were just jerks about it. And now I just kind of like mute everybody that acts like that. But I feel like when you're brand new, it can be really, it's a really bad impression sometimes, you know. What are you going to do?
Father Seraphim Rose gives an incredibly simple but incredibly difficult piece of advice. So he says, this is the beginning of spiritual life. The beginning is to not judge anyone and consider yourself the worst sinner in the world. The beginning of spiritual life.
Yes.
So
just try to get there. I'm trying to get there. Yeah. I
don't know. That's simple but not easy.
No, it's very hard. It's true.
Was there something in particular? Was there something in particular that just first like touched you about the Orthodox Church that made you feel like, oh yeah, this is a church that I want to keep being at?
God, we're so bad at like proselytizing that I don't have like a bunch of stuff in my pocket to answer.
We're interested.
I mean, the
in
beauty.
You. We're interested in you. We don't care about the whole thing. We're interested in you.
Right. All right. Ow. I mean, the beauty is the obvious answer, I guess, but it's just true. It just seems it's such a part of who I am at this point that it's like asking, like, when did you decide to be German? Like, well, I just am. It just is. Like, and it's the only place that made me feel that way. Like, I don't have to know everything about the countries where my families came from or even visit them. I just am that thing. Like, I'm not some great theologian. I just am Orthodox, and I didn't. But it's not like I felt like I belonged. Like, sometimes you go to places and you're surrounded by like people that are like, what are you doing here? You're not in our church. So it's not like it's not always the people. Yeah, I just felt true, and it felt like even if not everyone has some great faith or something, and then some people go to church because they need to go to church, and that's fine. It at least felt like there's a common thing we're all supposed to be working toward, and it's the real thing, and it's not like Jesus as an idea or God as a way of organizing society. It's like the real thing. And so I don't know, that's not that eloquent, but I just felt like it was the no BS, like most genuine direct line to Christ. And so I didn't want to go anywhere else.
That makes sense. I looked up your social medias and your different like artwork that you were doing. Can you share a little bit like behind like your I can't pronounce that word, iconography?
Yeah.
I just came across both words, liturgy and iconography, or however you say it, through visiting Orthodox churches in the last couple of years. So both those terms are rather new for me too.
Okay.
Like maybe a year and a half. I'm familiar with them now, but could you share a little bit more still, like what they mean to you?
I bet I like stopped kind of like I didn't paint anything for like 4 or 5 years while we were moving and school, and then when I started again, I started painting icons, and that whole time I was studying them. But people will like email me and be like, how do I start being an iconographer? And I'm like, well, do you draw? Like, you have to, it's different than art. And I think of it more as like a craft, but you do have to have like a art background. And I think being under the guidance of a person, yeah, but it's different. It's a different thing. You don't have as much freedom, which I like working in constraints, and I went to school and did art history, and I don't care about expressing myself, or like the fact that you don't sign your name on the icon, like really appealed to me. And I wanted to study medieval history, and that was right before art turned into this thing that's more about the artist and not the art, which I hate. So that appealed to me, and it just seemed like it's kind of like the whole journey of ending up Orthodox, which is like, why would I want to make any other kind of art but this kind of art, which I might still paint a picture of my friend or whatever, but yeah, it just seemed like this is the ultimate thing. Why would I spend my time learning or doing anything else? I don't want to make modern art anymore. Yeah. So, but I'm just starting that. And so I kind of just do commissions for friends, and that is actually what and selling the zine is actually what keeps us alive here and makes it able for me to be like so involved at the seminary. Otherwise I don't know what I would be doing out here, because like there's nothing out here. It's donations from viewers like you that make it so I can go to church more.
You talk about this in your zine a little bit, and this is the zine, by the way, and we'll link to it at the bottom if you want to check it out. It's
okay.
Very cool, and there's a history of kind of DIY Orthodox zines in America. Death to the World, I guess, being the most famous.
Yes.
And so you're part of a storied tradition now.
Oh, I owe that huge debt. Yeah.
You talk about so a lot of people say writing icons, but you talk about how that's actually not appropriate, and you prefer to say painting icons. Could you give just the short version of that?
Sure. Well, I'm stealing from Andrew Gould, who's an amazing designer of buildings and art. Just want to give him credit. But if you go, it's simple. If you go to a Russian website with like a sort of clunky translation, it'll say a photograph was written. Like it's just how they talk about images. It's just a weird translation error. And I think like it's not some like esoteric, mysterious, I'm writing the magical symbols of an icon. And I think that the reason that that term appeals to Westerners is because we like to think of breaking down the icon into symbols that we can decode instead of contemplating it and going into it and learning about it. Fortunately, we don't have like scholastic manuals about icons and what the code is, because it's not actually how they work, which is why I don't think you see icons discussed as much on social media, because it's harder to get in fights about what they mean if you don't have canons about them, which thank God. But I think that's why it appeals to modern people and Westerners, that term. It makes it seem exotic, but also like this intellectual exercise. And I think that's also how you end up with terrible icons, because people think they can just combine these symbols and then it'll be correct, but it actually has to look good. It's not like my icons are the best or anything, but like beauty is important, and it isn't just a matter of, otherwise we'd have AI make icons, God forbid. So is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe you could say us a little bit more about how if cobbling together of symbols to be interpreted is not how they work, could you talk a little bit about how they do work? Like, what is a better way? And I understand that there's a lot of Orthodox stuff. It's mysterious. It's it's an apophatic mystery. Okay, but granted that, like, it's possible to talk about things a little bit. So maybe you could.
Sure.
And specifically, I don't care about like some sort of. I'm curious about you, how you think about them when you paint them.
I think about it like it's like praying. I think it's important to get to know the person, and it is important to be correct in the colors you use, the positions you use, and there's whole manuals on like how to do an eye or a mouth, so that is important. But for me, it's like creating this like little jewel, like this well-balanced little jewel box of information, and all of it's important together, and each of its components are important, and neither of those things can be taken away. And I'm glad people have access to them through reproduction, but there's just nothing like something made by hand, and especially a painting made by hand of a real person that really existed. I think it's a singular and weird experience, and it feels like going into history, and it's really humbling. And I gave my first one to a monk because I was just like, it feels like you're almost like not allowed to do it. It feels really feels like scary, and I don't charge a lot yet because there's so many people that are so talented that are doing it, but also because I want my friends I want people to have physical things that aren't just printed. And I want that to be more affordable. I want artists to get paid, but I really want people to experience that, like, tactile, real, like, I made it last week, but it's part of history, and here it is. It's a real object. So that's the stuff I think about the most, I think.
Great. So I have some questions about the zines, but Keturah, why don't you take a question or two?
Yeah. I'm just like really appreciating your like perspective, different things you're saying about the icons, like how you love that there's not a signature put on there, which I didn't realize that before, or like how there's like different colors and different things. That appeals to like, I feel like that appeals to the free spirit in all of us, where we're like, this is not about like corporate,
right,
monetary, self-interest, all that kind of stuff. Like it really appeals to the being inside of us that's like, oh yeah, this is to share to everyone. This isn't for myself.
Right.
This isn't for my own prestige. I just really appreciate that. It's just
Thank
beautiful.
you. I mean, I put my watermark on it. Like, you have to make money, but like, there's an icon at the school that's one of the students painted, and I don't know what student it is, and I don't really want to. If I sold one to the school, I wouldn't really want people to know it's me. You don't want to make that a part of it so much, because it's not about me. Like, I get orders and I'm like, I'm grateful, but it's not about me. I'm just glad to do it. I'm glad to be able to do it.
Yeah. I feel like that's a conundrum with any sort of artist. Like, I'm a writer, or like Tolstoy, something that was appealing about Tolstoy is that he himself is like, try to like share his writing in a way that,
yeah.
I mean, for him, he went a little too far and it hurt his family somewhat, but he was like, no copyrights, no law, no money, kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm trying to like figure out that balance for my own writing. Like, how do I want to like share this with the world? So it's not about me. It is about the story.
Yeah.
But still, like, you have to make money, you have to live.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that balance. But yeah, I don't know. I just love that. It makes me appreciate Orthodoxy more and the icons more, knowing that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious to hear.
It's very punk rock.
So I'll give it. Yeah.
Let's talk about your zine. So you just released the 3rd issue. Is that right? And so the first 2 issues, the first one was about Fools for Christ, and I want to talk about that. And the second one was about Quiet.
Yes.
And these zines are neat because they're not photocopied. Like, you can't feel this through the screen, but like the pieces are glued. Like, they're each like a one of a kind thing. It seems like the pieces are glued together and they're sewed. And so, anyway, everyone should really check these out. It's, it harkens back to an earlier, like, I am of the generation that I got to experience zine stuff right before the internet hit.
Yep.
Like, when I was a teenager, I made zines and I had pen pals and all that stuff. And then the internet hit and that disappeared, but I got to experience the last days of it, and it was great. It was so much fun. I remember, like, I would just make zines and have pen pals and we would trade, and then I'd like make zines and send them off to get reviewed in like Rock and Roll and Heart Attack, because then you got the free issue. If your zine got reviewed, then you would get a free email. And it was awesome. So this, anyway, it was nice to know that someone out there still making zine. I mean, people never stopped, but it seemed like something.
It's not really a thing, though. Yeah,
not much of a thing anymore. But so the first issue about Fools for Christ. We can talk about Fools for Christ and some of your favorites. You tell a lot of stories, and my favorite 2 Fools for Christ are Saint Alexius of Rome and Saint Xenia of St. Petersburg.
Okay.
There are many
Yeah.
fools for Christ. And so maybe if you could just introduce us to the idea, like what does fool for Christ mean? And then could you tell us, one or two, three of your favorite
Okay.
stories that you write about here?
I have a part 2 of that, and Xenia will be in part 2, by the way. It's coming up.
Oh, good.
Because there are so many. I had to split it up into 2 issues.
Yeah,
so
Saint
it's
Xenia is incredible, but maybe we could talk about her.
yeah.
So go ahead, introduce who are the fools for Christ, and then you can talk about give us a few of them.
It's like, I mean, if you go to the desert and you live alone and you pray all the time and you like just eat roots and junk, like it's kind of weird. And if you do that in the city, it's really weird. And like these people are mostly homeless usually and strange, but they're not mentally ill, and they don't, they're saints. Like they're found to have lived holy lives, and like yeah, they're mostly in Russia, some in Holy Land, some in like a few in Greece. But it's just this like strange phenomenon of these sort of wandering people who kind of like call out nonsense when they see it. There's all stories of Saint Basil of Moscow, Basil the Blessed, who like meeting with the Tsar, who is I think it was like Ivan the Terrible. I don't know. I'm terrible with history because I dropped out of college. But he yeah, and like having predicting the future, but saying it in these like weird cryptic ways, and infuriating him and getting thrown out, and then it ends up being true. Doing things that aren't socially acceptable, but for a greater purpose and a virtuous one. Yeah, Basil in particular, like basically just like running around in a loincloth or naked in the snow. Yeah, there were a lot of people doing that kind of thing though, and a lot of them like were like weird grifters, as you can imagine, who are not saints. But there's actually, like, it's recent enough that there are photographs of people. Yeah, it just really appealed to me. It really appealed to me that like just because somebody is kind of like this weird outsider hobo, doesn't mean they're like up to no good, and just that there's like different ways to live. So I definitely wanted to kick the whole thing off with that.
And Saint Basil of Moscow is interesting because he walked around barefoot in the winter in Moscow. So Keturah is a pretty much barefoot all year round person. So maybe Saint Basil is your guy. I don't know. But he's not. They're given places of high honor. Like there's a cathedral in Moscow named after Saint Basil. That's like maybe one of the most famous cathedrals.
Right.
A huge cathedral. So
people think that's the Saint Basil from before, but it is not. It is the Holy Fool Saint Basil, and everybody knows that cathedral. It's the big, colorful one. Even if you don't know any cathedral, you know that one. That's named for him. Yeah.
So they're not obscure figures.
No.
They're it's like Saint Mary of Egypt. I don't know if it's fair to call her a fool for Christ. That's not really an appropriate. I don't know. She's sort of singular.
Yeah, I don't mean to like paint all the desert hermits that way. I just think that like there's parts of Orthodoxy that are really extreme and not for everyone, and everyone has a different kind of way of, and that's their way, and it is very special and rare.
But I just bring up Saint Mary of Egypt.
Yeah,
she had a very intense, very intense and very marginal life. But she's given an entire Sunday.
Yeah.
Leading up to holy, she is basically like as honored as any saint in the church. So these figures who are you read the life of Saint Mary of Egypt aloud, and if anyone's unfamiliar with her, the really short version is that she was a a prostitute, but I don't even know if she was a prostitute. Sometimes she would just have sex with lots of men for free, and was just
Right.
a very scandalous life, and joined people going to the Holy Land.
Yep.
And just tried to corrupt as many as she could on the way.
Yeah.
And then when she tries to enter the church, she can't. She's
Yeah.
physically repelled from the church, and she ends up in front of an icon of Mary.
Yeah.
And asks for, Mary's intercession, and ends up entering the church, and then going off into the desert. And
for decades.
And then
Yeah.
Ghost finds her, and she's been in the desert. She's like emaciated, naked, wandering around in the desert. And I think she's like levitates when she prays,
Yeah.
And they have this exchange back and forth where like each of them is asking the other to pray, like, pray for
bless me.
Bless me.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you bless me. No, you bless me. And they kind of go back and forth.
Well, and the monk too, who went to Saint Zosimus, was like, he was with his monastic brothers, and he was like, I have achieved just like the whole thing. I'm good. I can't imagine anyone else being higher than me. And then he went into the desert just in case, and that's who he found. And he was like, oh, I don't know anything. This woman is amazing.
And she asked him to come back the next year. And she walks on water and all kinds of things. And then when she dies,
to have communion. Yep.
And when she dies, he's trying to bury her, and the ground is too hard, and so a lion shows up and digs the grave. Anyway, it's an amazing story. It sounds, I think it's true, but I'm sure to many people it sounds totally fantastical. And this story is completely, like, there's a Sunday leading up to Easter, Pascha, where the story is read in every Orthodox church in the world. She's like as normal, she's just like a completely normal part of the Orthodox calendar. Anyway, kind of wild.
I mean, there's probably an icon of her like in almost every church if it's big enough. Like, she's a big deal. Yeah.
But could you tell us one or two of the Fools for Christ you wrote about in your zine?
Oh my gosh, my mind's gonna blank out now.
Or alternatively, talk about the you have all these pictures of these messages.
Oh yeah, rat gas.
Talk about those? Yeah, can you talk about rat gas?
Well, the one I will say, the one saint recently sainted in the first issue, he is one of the few who's recent enough that there are photographs, and he's totally amazing. George, Saint George. And I don't know if people call him a fool for Christ, but there's so many overlaps that I just threw him in there. He he went to the Holy Land, and then he came back to Eastern Europe, and he just like would visit convents and sleep in their yard and sleep in a clock tower, and people would try to give him money, and he would only like take one alm. George the Pilgrim, yes.
There he is.
And just wore rags. Yeah, he poses with all these priests, and he just is wearing his just total rags. He would collect bread with the alms that he got, and then he would pass out bread in front of the church, like poor children and homeless people. And yeah, he was a really amazing guy. His whole life, just like dedicated. Children would follow him around, and he read his Psalter over and over all day. He would read it by heart. People would ask him for advice, and he would just like pull a psalm out of his brain. So yeah, that guy's an inspiration for sure. He's probably my favorite in there right now. The rat gas guy, that's what I call him, the graffiti guy. When we were in Binghamton, I came from this like huge graffiti culture in Seattle, and I thought, well, what am I going to find out here in this like upstate New York town? And it ended up being this incredibly prolific, like he must work on it all day, every day. Old guy, I met him once, and he just puts up these wheat pasted handwritten messages that are about how God is great, drugs are bad, and abortion's bad. And he didn't talk about COVID. He didn't talk about Trump. It's just God is great, drugs are bad, and abortion's bad 24/7. And it is so prevalent in the area that you'll come across like 6 or 7 layers that this guy has put up where like they've worn off or been torn, and he just pastes up new ones. And you drive around and they're just like everywhere, all like in this weird script. And it's kind of disjointed, like he might have some like mental health problems. But I mean, I talked to him, he was pretty lucid. But they are stuff like rat gas, chems, kill babies, stop drugs, just like weird borderline gibberish. Fascinating though. And the more you look at it, the more you get this picture into his life, because he's like, he will put, it isn't just paper, it's like envelopes, receipts, anything. And he'll take cereal boxes and product boxes and write on the inside and paste those up. So he's really into Jiffy corn muffins and Raisin Bran. I figured out. I actually have some of his like original stuff that I was able to take down. I have like 4 pieces of it. I'm just, every time I go back there, I'm like, where is he? Where's Rat Gas? So yeah, he's like my favorite graffiti artist right now. Even though I'm pretty sure he's not really in that subculture, but that's what he is. Just like Jack Chick was a comic book artist.
Is Chick still alive?
No, he's dead. Yeah.
Okay. Man.
What a weirdo.
Legendary and prolific.
Yeah.
The other issue is about quiet, and the format is really neat. It's like an accordion fold. Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah.
That's what I call it.
Yeah.
Anyway. Accordion fold. And in here, I was pleased to see there's a quotation from a good friend of the podcast, Tara Ann Thiek, who I was hoping, I tried to recruit her to join this episode, but she has like a new baby and is doing good things in her life, so she wasn't able to join us. But she's quoted in here, and it's a lovely just meditations on the importance of quiet. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Could we fill up the silence more of with speaking about the importance of quiet?
It's me doing really unpopular things like print media and telling everybody to shut up. I just like, it's so quiet out here, and it's so amazing the quiet out here in like the edge of rural Pennsylvania. And I appreciate it so much. And I just started thinking about like the connection between like actual quiet and quiet inside of you, which I had less to say about. I kind of left it up to people smarter than me, because I like inner stillness is like, I hope I get there someday. But I do think it's not unrelated to being able to like have a quiet environment. And yeah, I also get like a little Ted Kaczynski with it, because like you can't really find quiet anywhere. There's always like the refrigerator or the traffic far away, and it, like you can't let it drive you crazy, but it is a problem. It is not normal, and I think it might kind of be driving everyone insane. Not to like black pill on the Doomer Optimism podcast. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that stuff.
It's a lovely I don't know if are either of these still available, number 1, number 2, or are they sold out?
Number 1 is, I think I have like 10 copies left. Number 2 sold out.
Well, you'll have to come over to my house, good people of Doomer Optimism, if you want to read it. Or track down someone else who's ordered it already.
I think that someday, because I'm only going to do it for like another year. This is the last month people can get a year's subscription, and you like save a bunch of money on it. But like, I'm only going to do it for another year, because in a year we're going to get sent to some parish and I'm going to have too much going on. But I would like someday to put out a compilation maybe, or like a best of. But I mean, it's never going to be like the originals, because like you said, they're all like stitched up and sewn together. And one thing I'll not do those. There's not gonna be any PDFs online or anything like that. I kind of want to keep it off the internet. Yeah. Unless some Judas betrays me, but that's out of control. So whatever.
So I have something to run by both you and Keturah about quiet. So I have a wingnut theory that
Yes.
So if you look at people in the past, they were able to write an incredible amount.
Yeah.
Like you pretty much pick out any random theologian from the 18th century, totally unknown people, they'll have like, oh yes, and then he completed his 40-volume work on something or other. You know what I mean? Like people wrote
Right.
this incredible amount. And I think I don't have any evidence to this, and I haven't even worked out how this works. But I think like electrical noise is incapacitating.
Yeah.
Like intellectually and spiritually. And it's interesting, like Martin Heidegger built his hut by the Black Forest, and there's no electricity in it, and he went there to write books. Okay, say what you will about Martin Heidegger, but I think it's interesting. And people also wrote by hand or a typewriter. And very few, we can probably count on one hand number of truly good books that have been composed on a computer. Very few. And I'm curious, Keturah, how you write. And if you compose on a computer, maybe we'll have to add two hands. I haven't read your books, but I'm sure they're also excellent.
So for me,
does that ring true to either of you?
I think that does,
of course.
True. For me, what I've noticed in a lot of like writing communities is the need to have something going on in the background. People like to have music playing. They like to have their chocolate. Oh, I can't, like, it's like eating chocolate and writing are synonymous activities. Not true. Like you have to be able to detract yourself from everything. No music, no chocolate, no tea. Like those are great things. But you just have to be able to like, oh, I actually don't need these things to write. I don't need a laptop. I don't need all these things. There was a time where I was like, oh, I can't write because I haven't got a laptop. So I wrote my first novel thumb typing on my phone.
Wow.
I think a laptop can I think a laptop can sometimes be a hindrance just because there's so many distractions available on it, such as like YouTube and music and Spotify. But if you're able to, the reason I feel like my laptop does not detract me is because I learned to first write with what I had already, which was a notebook and my phone. And then when I had a laptop, I now view my laptop as a noiseless device. I don't play music on my laptop. I don't eat chocolate while I'm working on my laptop. While I'm on my laptop, I'm in the mood. I'm in the zone of my novel. That's all I'm focusing on is that novel. And I think that's kind of part of what it is. It's just like people don't have focus and don't have dedication to the actual project. They have to have all this like aesthetic and thing around them. I don't know. That's my overall.
Yeah.
And everyone has earbuds in or headphones on now. They're ubiquitous, and I really wonder what that's going to do. I feel like this is where it's like people listen, I don't know what they listen to, music or podcasts. So, if you're listening to this right now, turn it off immediately. And stop listening. But what is it doing to us? I don't know. I don't wear headphones when I'm out and about. Like I ride the bus and I read on the bus, or sometimes chat with people. There's some people I occasionally see. There's a woman from church who sometimes rides the same bus route as me, and we chat or whatever. But maybe I'm just being high and mighty because I don't wear headphones, so obviously that's the way to do it. But I do really wonder. I don't know. I don't have any grand theory about headphones, but I really think that something strange is going on. You think, what's the Pascal thing? Like all problems in the world are because you can't sit in a dark room by yourself.
Yes.
Or whatever.
Yes. When we first came out here, there was the abbot teaches an amazing class, and I got to sit in on it, and he would talk about being in the altar, like serving in the altar. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but he talked about like you have to stand in the fire. And I know he's talking about like being that close to the altar and like becoming a priest and doing this special thing. But I was so helped by that, because being in church was such a like with all these strangers, and it's this big crowd and there's all this stuff going on, and I didn't really know what was expected of me, or if I was going to fit in, or if I was screwing up, was so anxiety inducing. And then being like, I'm in a monastery church, and like God is so here, and the air just feels like thick, and like it's so surreal. And knowing that there is this abbot who's like brilliant. I don't know if he does his job. All the monks are like his family. He's incredible, but he's also like was a skateboarder in California. Like he's just a guy at the same time. And just telling us like you have to stand in the fire, you just have to be there, was so comforting, because I'm just like, oh, it's not just me. Everyone's kind of going through a thing right now. And like the reason I'm telling you this is because like when you start turning things off, you have so much anxiety. You just want to like drink or eat a bunch of food, or like it's really, I think now is like the highest time for that. People like have physical reactions. They can't stand the quiet and stillness, and it's like, yes, it's hard. It's hard. It's good for you. Like you have to just endure and get stronger.
If you're still listening,
hard, but good things are hard.
If you're still listening to this podcast episode at this point, it's screwing up.
None of us are rich.
You have to turn it off and sit in a quiet, dark room for a while. Like, is it in the Gospel of Matthew where the words, when you pray, you have to go into it by yourself, you have to close the door? Is that in the Gospel of Matthew? I
should know.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I mean, it's in the context of like the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? Like the one like praying ostentatiously versus.
Oh yeah, right.
Okay,
right.
I apologize if I'm mixing these up, but I've always.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know the one.
I've always taken that really literally. Like close the door.
Sure.
I don't know. Like, okay.
There's also the part about the God was not in the wind, and God was not in all these crashing noises, and it was the still small voice. It's not this enormous ostentatious thing all the time. Yeah.
The nice thing is that everyone's turned this off, has followed our instructions. Turn this off so we can talk about whatever we want.
I'm
going to be out in the world. No one's going to be listening past this point. They're so inspired that they've closed the door.
Yeah.
So Keturah, you've done a lot of solo travel.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm curious about that. You go visit people and dance and see friends and so on. But when you're traveling solo, there's always these stretches. Of aloneness, and I'm curious about what that experience has been for you, that solitary, and Elena, if you have anything, so I'm curious also. I don't know if you were like camping out under I-5 is now a very popular thing to do. Popular is not really the right word in Seattle. There's a lot, and I don't know if when you were there it was less
there's no one else,
less bustling. So anyway, I'm curious, solitary from both of you, like that, like spiritually or whatever, that experience, that solitary experience.
I think Keturah knows better than me, because there was no crowd like there is now, but I had a couple of homies, so it was a little safer. I have not traveled alone like she has, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you should tell us about it.
Yeah. So I had a little bit of prep because I ran a cleaning business for 9 years. And I also worked as a seamstress. And those are both things that are solitary activities with long periods of hours of what are you going to do at these hours? When I first started cleaning, I would listen to music all day long. And after, I want to say 2 years of that, I was like, my brain is dying. I can feel my brain dying. I'm like not able to focus. I used to be a bookworm. I was like having a hard time focusing on reading. and I was having a hard time focusing on my writing, and I wasn't listening to music while I wrote, but I was still having a hard time. And I was like, oh, I'm listening to too much music. So I stopped listening to music and just started allowing myself to clean in complete silence and to sew in complete silence. And all of a sudden, like my brain, my thoughts were coming back, and everything was coming back that I was wanting to think about and to focus on. Plot holes in my stories were coming to me all of a sudden. I was like, oh, was having these epiphanies, and then I was able to focus on my reading better. But like, because I already had that experience when I started driving, I just know that like there's certain times of the day where I'll turn the music on. Like, to say if I'm driving at nighttime, I like to listen to the music between like, let's say 9-11 at night. Like, that's just a great time to be dancing in the car while you're driving. But like in the daytime, I like to switch it up with like quiet audiobooks and phone calls, and kind of go between those three. And I just have like long my brain is dying. I must have been listening to too much something. I was listening to a Wizard of Oz book today. Most of today I've been listening. I had a couple phone calls and a Wizard of Oz book and a bunch of silence. So like I've had a lot of both, a lot of all of those. But yeah.
So Keturah, you grew up with lots of brothers and sisters, and I'm curious if you really craved solitary experiences after what I imagined growing up. There was very little.
Because I was the oldest and like the bossy one and kind of like the second mother, I actually naturally excluded myself from some of my siblings and was known as the one who was the recluse. So I just took my time and I had it for the most part. I mean, like I got annoyed and was like, oh, why these people bother me? Like, let me have my space. But I still had probably more space than some of my siblings had, just because I claimed it. Sure. I would say, yeah. But also, like, I'm very extroverted. It's kind of like this weird like conundrum where I am very extroverted, but I still like my space and I still like my quiet. And I've been able to mostly have it just because I can feel when I'm like, oh, I've had too much quiet, too much noise, too much music, and I just like, I'm like, okay, no more of that. And or like even times where like I'm reading too much. Like I remember like 11 years old, like I've been reading too much. I'm taking a break for like a year from reading until I read through my Bible, kind of things. Like so I've always been just more mindful about like how my brain is processing stuff and making sure I am putting the things in that is creating the sort of mindset that I want to have.
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
I've been reading Newt Thompson's Growth of the Soil, which is an incredible.
I love that book so much.
It's an incredible book, so briefly, the book is set like early 1900s in the wilds of Norway, and a man named Isaac carves out of the wild, like the forest and bogs of Norway, and builds a homestead farm. Many other things happen, but something that's really fascinating is so his wife goes to prison actually in the city for a while for infanticide, and one of his sons goes off to the city and works a job. And something he really describes is how just that experience in the city kind of ruins both of them for a while, makes it very hard for them to like the son just can't really do rural life anymore.
Yeah.
The wife eventually integrates into the farm, but it's hard. But I think a lot of it is something about like noise and silence and and different and also just the amount of physical labor, like that they're doing so much physical labor all the time, and that being away from it for a few years, like the son was never able to sort of work as hard as he could had he stayed on the farm anymore. I say that I'm not a farmer, I would be ruined in the wilds of Norway, but anyway, it just came to mind.
Yeah.
I want to read that. I haven't read that.
So good. It's so good. I have a book that I'm curious if you've heard of or read. It's an Orthodox book called, I have it with me because it's in my car, The Ethics of Beauty by Timothy Patatsis, I think.
We
So
own it,
good.
but I haven't read it. My husband read it. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I've
a
heard good
client of mine
things.
I used to teach for, he read it. Yeah, it's so good. I'm only like this far through it, not very far. As you can tell, it's like a thick book.
It's a
We've been
lot.
working on
Yeah.
it since February. It's so good though. I'm also curious, like your
Keturah,
zines,
could you lay it on us? What is this book about? Could you give us a little something?
yeah, it's it's about truth and beauty, I suppose, and like so far what I'm reading about is like trauma and with PTSD in particular, and I think it's going to like deal with different types of trauma, but it's been focusing on like PTSD at the beginning, and just like how these people, they go through this decision of like choosing the lesser evil rather than the greater evil, but they're still choosing evil, therefore their soul is damaged, therefore they need something to heal their soul. And like we all know this, like people with PTSD, they suffer, and like but we don't quite recognize like why they suffer and what they need, and we're like, oh well, we'll give them truth, but truth doesn't heal a betrayed soul, because they were betrayed by truth. They were betrayed by, well, you're doing the right thing because you're choosing the lesser evil, but not like confronting that thing, well, you've still chosen evil, kind of thing. And so like the author suggests that the solution to healing isn't necessarily being confronted with truth, but being confronted with beauty and with goodness. And then they talk about like this process of like with the Orthodox Church, like removing yourself from the church, kind of like this self-excommunication, but having this like priest that still works with you and still like says like, yes, you're excommunicated, but I'm going to like work with you. I don't quite understand how Orthodox churches work, but I love what they're talking about, how he talks about it in here. And just like that conundrum of truth versus beauty, and of being healed with beauty there in order to be able to see truth fully again.
I think it's really merciful and like there's I have this idea of like the cool dad, and like the dad who lets you smoke in the house, and how that actually is really harmful for you. And I think it's like people hear excommunication and they think that that's so mean and cruel, but all it means is like you're not prepared for communion. You can't come up and take communion. You're not fully in the church. So if you go to war and you kill somebody, or if somebody breaks into your house or something, like you're probably not all together to just go to church on Sunday. Like you do need extra care, and not just like to be indulged. You do need a priest to work with you. And I feel like, I mean, not to sound like super crotchety, but like we need like medicine, not just indulgence and comfort, like you need somebody to be like, hey, this is so important and so meaningful that you need to be prepared for it. So I think that's probably what they're getting at when they talk about like a priest working closely with you. Yeah.
I forgot to clarify, like he presents the excommunication in a very positive way, and like that was rather interesting to read, because I have a lot of Anabaptist roots and have like been around like a lot of Pentecostal and Amish people, where excommunication is not a positive thing. Like it's something that
it's like the shunning.
It's more shunning, and this is not a shunning. This is more just like, okay, we're going to remove you from this place where truth is actually doing more damage to your betrayed soul, so that way we can administer to you and offer you beauty. And it was it's just a really beautiful view of excommunication and how to use it in this process of healing and redemption and reconciliation. So yeah, it's just a beautiful book, and I'm loving it. It's just
cool. I'm moving right now, so we'll keep that one.
Yeah, you should definitely keep it. It's an expensive book. I paid $50 for this, and it's just paperback. Yeah, it's crazy.
Sounds worth
curious
it.
How long do your zines? Yeah, how long do your zines take to make, and like how many do you make of each one when you do them?
I make them every month. They're always late, but everyone always gets it. And it just depends on how I make them. That accordion one was kind of insane, so I didn't make as many. I like to, like over deliver, and some of them are quicker than others. I'm sure in the future some of them will just be paper stapled together when I'm really busy or whatever. They're all at least 20 pages. They're usually way more than that. But yeah, I mean, that's my job. Once I realized people were gonna go for it, and it brings in enough money to pay some bills, I just like, I get up every day and sit down and work on it, and paintings too. So I don't know. I don't really time it. I don't really know. I'm probably not even making minimum wage, but I don't want to die every day. Like I've had like the worst jobs ever, like comically bad jobs. And so I'm just like, this is fine. It's fine. I don't care. Yeah, but I really love doing them. So thank God. Thank God. We could do a whole episode on my nightmare jobs.
I'm excited to get a subscription. I think I've been sold. So beautiful.
As long as you're patient, because like I said, sometimes they do take a while, but you'll get it.
Oh, I have to pour concept of time anyway, so by the time I get it, oh, that's right, I paid for this.
Okay, good.
Every time. Yeah. Also, like
go ahead.
I'm just curious, like how the rest of us can find stories about like what you call these fools for Christ. Because I mean, like they're not in the Bible. I haven't read them in the Bible. But like, is there some book or some like source where we can like read more about these different sorts of people?
There's, you know what I think I did was I went to like the Orthodox wiki, and there was a incomplete list, and then I just searched, and a lot of them were on websites with pretty good translation from Russia. And just kind of piece together stuff. And there's also, what is it called? A Manaean? I'm so bad with names of things. There are like books of saints that you can get a hold of, and there are a lot of them that are digitized. And the Russian word is Eurodivy, which is IURODIVY, or sometimes it starts with the letter Y. So if you just kind of like go down like a little Wikipedia hole, I recommend it.
Nice. So basically,
there's Ancient Faith Publishing publishes just like an affordable paperback with a
excellent. Okay.
With a saint story, with a story of a saint for every day of the year, sometimes too, on the saint's feast day. You're not going to get, most days are not a fool for Christ. Like yesterday was the feast of Saint Constantine, who was an emperor, but you'll get some mixed in. And almost so I read one every morning, and pretty much every morning it's reading about someone being like tortured and beheaded under the reign of Diocletian, because that's just it's just like so many martyrs under Diocletian, which is an interesting way to start the day. You know, that in the early church, people were baptized knowing there was a good chance they were going to be killed in the most gruesome way imaginable. And really, some of these forms of torture are just, I don't know, it's unbelievable like how anyone could even conceive of killing someone in some of these ways. But Ancient Faith Public, it's just like a little paperback, and just get saint stories every day. But then there's also there's some books where it's like there's just tons of published saint stories out there.
I recommend reading the lives of the saints to anyone, and I would much prefer a piece of paper, like a book, than tooling around on the internet. It is just hard to find the holy saint stories, but like I read of the lives of the saints all the time, and it like changes how you look at the world and how you think about what you want to do with your life, and it kind of makes you glad for everything, like hot water, no one sticking hot pokers in your brain, like you said, there's crazy stories in there. Inspiring and sometimes gruesome.
And there's such a diversity of saints. It's interesting. So there's some consistent things. Okay, so saints always have a rich prayer life. They serve the poor. They're humble. Okay, this is sort of like baseline things that are just true in like every story. But within that, it's like, there's rich, poor, powerful, totally powerless, like parents, martyrs, monastics, pretty much every possible, soldiers, like every form of life you can imagine. Like there are holy lives within that, which is comforting. Like you don't have to go live like, there's wild stories like, oh yes, for 20 years he lived in the forests of Russia barefoot, like preaching to bears or whatever, and consumed nothing but
Right.
bread and salt. Okay, yes, there are those. But then there's other, who are like lived, uh more normal, whatever that means. Like my priest
Sure.
always tells us that, like, sin is abnormal. Like normal life, what you were created to do is to worship God and be in communion with God. That is normal. Like that is normal life. We have moved into abnormal.
Yeah.
Like since that afternoon in the garden, things have gotten really abnormal. Like the church is trying to make us normal again. So all of these saints are actually like, they are normal, but you know what I mean? Like a more recognizable life.
Yeah. The married saints. Yeah. Saints that go to work.
Just, totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, service to the poor and prayer, it seemed to be the, but like some of the saints is like, was Saint Mary of Egypt even baptized, I don't remember that part of her story. It was like she went into church like once in her life. I think she set foot in a church once in her life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not like there's a lot of these saints who they're not goody two shoes. They're not, some of them, but anyway, it's a whole range.
I love that. Yeah. We have a couple books that we keep on our shelves that my dad probably got from the Amish or stuff. I think one's a little bit more common among Christians. I can't remember which it is, but one's the Book of Martyrs and then Fox's Book of Martyrs. And they're both just basically about the early Christians. And one's really thick though. One's like the size of this old Catholic Bible. It's so thick and so large. And it's just full of like martyr stories. And I keep meaning to read through it because it's like a lot of the people in my circle have that book or they've read through it, and I'm like, that's the one book I have not read through, and I've seen it on my shelf since before I can remember. But it's also kind of like, like, do I want to read through these stories, because every single one is about people dying like in tragic ways, and like
I find ours pretty inspirational though.
Yeah, no, they are inspirational. I've read bits and pieces and they are very inspirational, but they can be gruesome and sad too.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And the Coptic martyrs recently, who were beheaded by ISIS on the beach, it's just like out of the Book of Acts or something. Like there were 12 of them, and a 13th companion who wasn't a Christian, who professed Christ and died with them on the beach. It's just straight out of the old, that stuff is still on. We're still in the middle of it, like nothing has changed. And Father Seraphim Rose says somewhere, it's like the only good thing that happened in the Russian Revolution were all of the martyrs.
Yeah.
So that martyrdom is it's a desirable and good thing in the church, not a it's easy to say that in a comfortable say in a comfortable room, but apparently the families of the Coptic martyrs responded with joy. What greater honor than to have a child a martyr. Again, very easy for me to say my children are like safely safe and happy, but anyway. So we should probably wrap this up. Keturah, do you have any final questions?
I don't think so. I'm just very intrigued by the zine, and I hope that it does well. In a couple of years you do it. I also applaud that it's a short-term thing. I think we need a lot of short-term visions, because like that's what keeps things real and authentic, and I love that. I just love that.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to be a part of it while you're doing it. When I get home, I'm going to subscribe.
And we'll link to it. I hope no one's still listening, because you all have turned this off and gone to a quiet place. But we're going to link.
Everyone, turn this off and pray right now.
And then subscribe.
And subscribe to the zine.
Yes.
And a final question. I'm really curious, and we can end with this. Of God willing, in a year you're going to be a presbytera, which is like the wife of a priest somewhere. I'm curious what your thoughts about that. Like, what is there some process in the seminary of preparation for you? Like, have you been talking to women who are married to priests? Have you,
The
like, what
deans,
does the preparation look like, or what do you think that's going to be like?
I'm sure for some of the women, it's like whatever, they've grown up Orthodox or whatever. Maybe their dad was a priest, and they kind of are just waiting for their husband to go through school. But it's like, I think it's pretty hardcore, personally. Like, go like it's like enormous change, and formation for the women. I can't, like, I say we're at seminary, and everyone there says that too. They like you. Everyone refers to you as being in seminary with your husband, really. Yeah, there are, I mean, the dean's wife has events, Matushka Jeanette. She's incredibly warm and friendly and informative. And we have meetings like twice a month. And of course, you're in church all the time. And every kind of year has their little cohort that they're closer with. So there's other women, we're always like in the group chat and stuff. And people watch each other's kids and things like that. People out here have babies all the time, and so you end up, the godparent one's baby. Like, it's pretty amazing. And you just kind of, like, with the men, it's more clear cut. Like, they got to pass these classes and stuff, and they have, now you're a deacon, now you're a priest. But at the same time, like, I can't like speak to like St. Vlad's or other seminaries, but out here, like, the formation outside the classroom is just as important. I mean, we like live across from like the school is across from a monastery, and so like my confessor's a hire monk. There's monks around, and it's the monastery church, and so like it's really hard like to describe like how totally immersed you are in all of that, and in this like weird in between place of a social life where like you're not a parish priest's wife, but you're also like not really just the layperson that you were before. And so it's like incredibly stressful, but it's really good education. So I really don't know what it'll be like. I know that people don't like change, and they don't like having to get used to a new priest and a new priest wife. And so it's, hard. It's hard. People are really fragile when their priest leaves or retires or whatever. But I'm tough, whatever. I love the Archbishop, so I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully, I mean, we don't have children, unfortunately, but I feel probably like parents do when you're like, I just hope I don't screw anybody up too bad. Just want to do a good job. Yeah, but I'm confident.
Excellent.
Ish.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This is great.
To the handful of people who have failed to heed our warnings and instructions, throw your computer or iPhone in the nearest ocean and never listen to a podcast again. And instead, subscribe to Hobo Nickels.
No.
We'll link and sit quietly and read it. And if you're curious about Orthodoxy, don't read about it on the internet. Go
to church.
Go to Divine Liturgy once and see, because you can't. You just gotta taste it and feel it and see it, hear it, and anyway, that's the pitch.
And I wish Tara had been here, but Keturah, you're fascinating and kind, and I'm so glad I got to meet you like this. This was really fun.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I loved hearing your story. It's beautiful. And just for everyone else and for you, like, I'm not Orthodox, but I love it so much, and I think everybody should visit the Orthodox Church more than once, especially a Pascha service. Is that how you say it? Pascha? Pascha?
Pascha, yeah.
Pascha. That is the most beautiful Easter service I've ever been to, and I'm going to go more than once in my lifetime. And yeah, it's just like these experiences are so rich and beautiful, whether or not you're Orthodox, and I think everyone should experience it.
And not
Because
every
of it.
Orthodox parish, the church I go to, the services are not particularly beautiful at all. The singing's actually quite bad. And you know
Oh,
what?
no.
That's
True.
all right.
Happens.
The Greek chanter at my church, he will not be offended if he hears this. He knows this better than I do. And I love the man. He's wonderful. I think he's completely tone deaf.
Oh.
But he
Yeah.
he chants with gusto, and it's totally endearing. So it's not always beautiful. It oftentimes is, but not always, and that's okay. Okay, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.